What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. So in this video I'm going to be giving you my top 3 skins from all Demacian champions. But before I do that I need to cover Sylas, because unlike the other League of Legends champions from Demacia, I've not given Sylas the full treatment. I've not gone through his story, and I've also not gone through and reviewed his skins. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to review his skins now, then I'm going to give you my top 3 Demacian skins. Then I'm going to come back to Sylas and go through his story. And then I'm going to finish off with another story from Demacia. I think I'm going to do Xin Zhao. I'll timestamp the whole thing as I always do. So without further ado, let's kick things off with Sylas' skins. I've done a part 1 of Sylas, which I'll put a link in the top right hand corner or left hand corner. Somewhere on the screen there will be a link popping up to go back to Sylas' original review. But in that review I don't think it will. I definitely know I didn't do his skins. Anyways, I am no traitor, I am the true Demacia, which he's got a point to a certain extent, minus killing innocent people, but apart from that he's kind of got a point. Anyways, what I'm going to do, move on to skins. So let's go. Okay, a little bit of flash, a little bit of okay. So is it an update? Boy, this is a little bit different to normal. You'd have clicked the wrong button, that's why. We will get there eventually. Is it game info? Whoa, where are your skins, Sylas? Help me out here. Let me see that other there. What? It's got, oh, there is, so, I think Sylas had that explains it. That explains why. I think Sylas just has his base skin here, which is pretty cool. I'm imagining as well this might be Lux. This might be Lux there, maybe. Anyway, this is his only other skin. Surely it can't be. Which is pretty cool. And if it's his only skin, then that is going to be my favourite skin, as I don't have any other choice. But let me just double check that. Bear with me. Right, okay, so Sylas has two additional skins, I think. Let me zoom in here so you can see it properly. Right, so we've got his base skin here. We have the Lunar Wraith Sylas. The hateful lord of the Lunar Wraiths, Sylas has waited eons to invade the heavenly realm and depose its godly stewards. What happens to the balance between heaven and earth is not his concern. He simply craves chaos, and the honour of his triumph is fast approaching. Okay. So, we don't need to know about the GPU, forget that. So, that's that one, and the Freyod Sylas, which we see in the Warriors 2019 cinematic. Free from the kingdom that once imprisoned him, Sylas of Dreadborn marches from Demacia to the Freyod. With every step he takes, he remembers what others have branded him. Mage, traitor, kingslayer, like Game of Thrones. Names he revels in as he endures the bitter cold. His heart warmed by the fires of rebellion, it will be here in the icy north that he will seize the ancient power needed to fuel his revolution. So it looks like, now I can zoom back out a little bit more, he has his base skin, this one which is the Lunar Wraith, and also the Freyod. I don't think he has any of us. Let's just triple check. No. So I have a choice. This is pretty quick one. I have a choice between 2. And the winner I will put into the category of best skins, and then we'll go through the favourite Demacian skin. This one or the Lunar one. So I'm actually going to say, yeah, the Lunar one. Yeah. I was tempted to say the one for Freyod skin, but no. That one just looks too good. So that's going to be my favourite skin from Sylas, pretty quick. So let's move on to now my favourite skin from Demacia. Let's go. Right, okay, so these are the 15 skins from Demacia, my favourite one for each champion. 15, okay. So if memory serves me right, the first one was 2-part, it was Kale and Morgana. So this first one is Morgana, this one, yeah, epic. I forgot what this one's called though. Coven, I think it's called, something like that. And the next one is, yeah, this is the Pentacle one from pentakill, one from Kale. Or for Kale. Yeah, I like how everyone's putting their hands in the air as well as she comes down. Yeah, cool. So let me go through every single one first, and then I'll pick out my top 3. So the next one was, so this is Garen's God King, I think it is skin. Yeah, nice. Okay, next one is, this is the Sylas one from Sona. Yeah, I actually went through and did the Sona theme a few weeks back, maybe last week as well. I love that theme. And I'm thinking of doing one for projects as well. They're my 2 favourite themes. So yeah, stay tuned for the project one. So that one is Sona. Then we have the Cosmic one for Lux. Yeah. The Cosmic theme is really good as well. Or the Dark Cosmic theme is really good. There we go. Then we have the Dark Cosmic for Javin the 4th. High Noon for Lucian was my favourite one for him. Yep. This is my favourite one. Pool Party for Fiora. Look at Darius. Look at Darius's face. I don't know who this is in the back cheering, but yeah. Good skin. This is my favourite one for Poppy, or Blacksmith, I think it's called. Then we have Phoenix for, who's this? Quinn. Phoenix for Quinn. Ruined. This is Ruined. Is it not Ruined King? Ruined version for Shivana, I think it is. Yep. Luna, the Luna one for Vayne. Oh, this is going to be tough. This is going to be really tough. And then we have the Dragon Killer, Dragon Seeker for Xin Zhao, and the what's this one? Galio Gatekeeper, I think. Gatekeeper for Galio. Woo! Okay, so if I had to pick my top 3, let's start off with my favourite. No, in fact, let's go in. Yeah, let's start off from the top. Let's not mess around. My favourite skin. Oh, wait. It's my favourite Demacian skin. Would have to be... Oh, I'm struggling here, guys. There's so many good ones. My favourite one would have to be... Luna. That Vayne one is so good. That is... But I am going to go with Pentakill. Kale Pentakill Mortal Reminder is my favourite Demacian skin. Yeah. That's number 1. Number 2 would have to be Morgana. This would have to be number 2. Just looks so good. And then number 3 would have to be Sona's is good. I really like this one from Lux. Really do. It's gonna have to be... I'm going with all the ladies here because it's gonna have to be this one. Yeah. That's gonna be 3rd. Close. It's between that one and this one from Shivana. But yeah, Luna's number 3. Number 2 is Morgana, which is close. Number 1 is the Pentakill Mortal Reminder version of Kale. So yeah, that's my top 3 favourite skins for all of the Demacian Champions. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back and read the story for Sylas. Let's go. So, the recruit. The sun was at its peak, just high enough to illuminate the exiles camped hidden deep in the canyon. From the shade of his lean-to, Sylas the Dreadborn waited patiently for his scouts to return. At last he saw her rounding the stone spire at the mouth of the crevasse, leading the wide-eyed young stranger into the camp. "This is Hap," said the scout. "He wants to join." Sylas emerged from his shelter, eyeing the youth casually. "Does he know? I know him from the underground. The Seekers took his family. He made it out by the hair on his hide." Sylas nodded, quietly assessing the young man. He could sense the boy was blessed with magical power, because that's obviously what Sylas can do. Some black and deadly pall. As for the rest of his character, Sylas could see nothing. He's a good kid, assured the scout, and he's from Dreadborn. Sylas's brow furrowed with pleasure. Dreadborn. Sylas' brow furrowed with pleasant surprise, as if meeting kin he never knew existed. The youth stammered out an introduction. I thought maybe I could join your cause, sir. The entire camp of outlaws laughed. The boy's eyes darted around the grinning face, searching for some hint of what he had done wrong. There's no sir here, chuckled Sylas, unless you want to address every one of us that way. Yes, the youth said, nearly repeating his mistake. Abashed? Yeah, I've heard that word before. The recruit seemed to wonder if he'd made the right choice in coming to the camp. Sylas placed a heavy shackled arm on the boy's shoulder, because obviously he's still rocking the shackles, hoping to quell his embarrassment. Be at ease, Hap. No one will judge you here. We're a long way from Dreadborn. He felt the youth relax his posture. I know your struggle. They're always watching you, hounding you, making you feel inferior. Well, there's none of that here. Here you belong. Hap beamed, started staring at his feet, as though he felt unworthy of his newfound joy. Do you know why I wear these chains? Asked Sylas. The recruit shook his head, too timid to offer a guess. They're not just weapons, they're a reminder. Yep, of where we come from. Of everything we're capable of and our liberation to come. Are you with me? Yes, I want to be liberated. Good, said Sylas. Tonight you will break your own chains. Right, okay. Dusk was falling, and the darkened brush on the side of the road was perfect cover for an ambush. There Sylas lay in wait with a dozen of his most trusted mages beside him. The recruit nervously picked at his fingernails. Don't worry, Sylas said with a reassuring smile. I was nervous for my first one. After a while it becomes as natural as breathing. Before the recruit's nerves could be assuaged, the thunder of hooves and wagon wheels rumbled in the distance like a coming storm. Within seconds the carriage came barreling down the road before the lurking hijackers. An instant before the horses arrived, Sylas signalled to his comrades and the ambush began. With a flick of his wrist, the scruffy old maid summoned a thick cord of iron vines that snapped across the road, catching the galloping horses at the knees. The racket was deafening, and the steeds fell neck first onto the dirt, the carriage careening over them. The mages sprang from their cover, subduing the dazed crew of the carriage with various weapons and spells. Sylas leapt atop the overturned coach, eager to seize the passengers of the unprotected cabin. Let's go, recruit, he called to Hap, beckoning the lad to join him. Hap scampered atop the cabin and began to help pry the door. It cracked open, revealing a very battered nobleman. Sylas's eyes flashed with a malicious gleam. Yeah, we know too well about that. Well, look who's kneeling now, my lord, said Sylas, extending his hand. The nobleman bristled, though he was gravely injured. His hatred for Sylas remained intact. I'll not cower before the likes of you. Good, said Sylas, because I wouldn't want you to miss this. In minutes, all the nobleman's guards and coachmen were lined up beside the road where their hands bound. Sylas paced the line, individually acknowledging each captive. I ache for you all, I do, said Sylas. You are merely cogs in their wheel. Sylas paused, his tone shifting harshly, as he gestured to the bound nobleman. But you chose to serve them, and thus serve their cause. He turned to his band of outcasts, loudly offering a question. Brothers and sisters, these folks work in the service of swine. What does that make them? Swine, replied the outcasts. Should we allow them to go free? No, yelled the mages. What if they have a change of heart? Promise never to bother us again, asked Sylas, with a coy smile creeping across the corners of his mouth. They'd be lying, yelled the scruffy old mages from the bush. They can't be trusted, said another in the gang. Then what is to be done with them? Asked Sylas. Wait, they must die, shouted a young mage, his hatred beyond his years. Others yelled out in agreement until the phrase echoed across the land. Swine must die. Sylas nodded, as if he was slowly being persuaded by their words. So it must be. Softly, Sylas touched the shoulder of his recruit. His purse-type shackles began to fume with dark smoke. He closed his eyes, saving the captured power. The sight sent a quake of dread through the captors. Many fell to their knees and wept, pleading to be spared. Only the nobleman stood proud, defying his circumstances, as Sylas addressed his crew with sombre finality. It pains me that I cannot show you the beautiful world to come. The words sent a chill through the recruit. Sylas, no, I protested. These are just people. Ignoring the police, Sylas extended his arms and fingers and unleashed the magic stored in his gauntlets. A thick black cloud billowed from his fingers and collected above the heads of the nobleman's crew. Almost in unison, they began to claw at their throats in suffocation. Moments later, they fell to the ground dead. Well, you see, this is the problem with Sylas. A grave hush fell over the mages, having dutifully observed the execution. The nobleman wept silently, tears streaming over his clenched lips. The only sound came from the recruit. No, why? Said Hap, falling to his knees. Sylas eased the boy back to his feet, consoling him with a fatherly hand. Hap, you wanted to help our cause. This is it. This is our liberation. So, where is it now? So, he gently guided the recruit towards the nobleman and urged him forward, one dead lord at a time. Hap looked to the nobleman through tear-filled eyes. He held out a trembling hand, preparing to take the life before him. Then he let his arm go limp. I can't. Sylas's tender patience began to slip away. This man is not your friend. His fortune is built on your suffering. He would sooner see you hang than show you any kindness. The recruit would not budge. At last the nobleman found his voice. You're a monster, he said, his voice breaking. Yes, replied Sylas. That's what your kind said when you locked me in the dark. Sylas held forth his hand, its shackle still faintly glowing. The magic he had taken from Hap mustered one last wisp of blackness. The small dark cloud enveloped the nobleman's face, drawing the breath from his lungs. As the man writhed, Sylas looked back at the recruit, not in anger, but mourning. I'm sorry, Hap, but you are still not ready to be liberated. Go, return to your chains. Sylas watched as Hap turned to leave, his eyes averted in shame. The recruit looked down at the wrecked carnage in front of him and the long dirt road that wound back to the capital. Sylas could almost feel the boy thinking, dreading the measure that awaited him in his old life. Hap bent down, pried a dagger from his hand of the dead coachman, and returned to the nobleman, still struggling for breath on the ground. I'm ready. As the youth raised a dagger above the nobleman, Sylas' sorrow turned to unmitigated joy. No matter how many he liberated, it always made him smile. Right, okay, so this is the recruit, and this is the recruit's journey. So yeah, this is the problem with Sylas. Obviously, Sylas is a product of his environment, and it's kind of a little bit like karma, that they get what they deserve because they tortured and persecuted him. But he's in essence killing innocent people, especially the people that aren't the noblemen. They're innocent people, like Hap pointed out. But you can see that Hap, his decision is almost the lesser of two evils, because he said he shouldn't do that. He wanted to go back home, but he knew too well that going back home, what that entailed for him. So he was happy to join Sylas because it was, the lesser of two evils. And Sylas obviously is more than happy to accommodate. So that was good. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to finish off with another story. I think there's a second story to Xin Zhao that I'm going to read. I'm well aware there's probably about another 5 or 6 stories in total that I've not read, because some champions have multiple stories, but I'm not going to go through them all. I'm going to go through the one that League of Legends, the official website, recommends, and then I might go through a couple others. So I'm going to go through one for Xin Zhao now. I think it's Xin Zhao now. And that's going to be it. So without further ado, let's move on to that one. Right, so this story is Aftermath. So let's zoom in a little bit here. Aftermath. The first rays of dawn brushed the rooftops of the great city, turning pale stone to gold. The air was still, and the only sounds filtering up to the high garden terraces on the east side of the citadel were the gentle chorus of morning birds and the hushed murmur of the walking city below. Xin Zhao sat cross-legged upon stone dais, hands resting upon his spear, laid across his lap. He stared down across the lower garden tiers, over the battlements and out across Demacia's capital beyond. Watching the sunrise over his adopted homeland normally brought him peace, but not today. His cloak was charred and splattered with blood. Oh, okay, and his arm was dented and scratched. Strands of his iron grey streaked hair, no longer the full inky black of his youth, hung wild over his face. Having escaped his top knot, under normal circumstances he would have already bathed, washed away the sweat, blood and stink of fire. He would have sent his armour to the battlesmiths for repair and secured himself a new cloak. Appearances mattered, particularly as the seneschal of Demacia, but these were far from normal circumstances. The king was dead. So this ties in nicely with the Lux comics, where we find out about the king dying. We don't know the circumstances under which he died though, so maybe we might find out a little bit more in the story. He was the most honourable man Xin Zhao had ever met, and he loved and respected him above all others. He was oath-sworn to protect him, and yet Xin Zhao had not been there when he was needed the most. He took a deep, racking breath. The weight of his failure threatened to crush him. The major uprising the day before had taken the whole city by surprise, which obviously was probably led by Sylas. Xin Zhao had been wounded in the running battles as he fought to make his way back to the palace, but he felt nothing. For hours he'd sat there alone, letting the cold of the stone steep into his bones as the shroud of grief and shame and guilt descended upon him. Excuse me. The palace guards, those that hadn't been killed in the attack, had left him to his misery, keeping clear of the tiered garden where he sat in silence through the hours of darkness. Xin Zhao was grateful for that small mercy. He didn't know if he could cope with the accusation in their eyes. The sun reached him finally like the light of judgment, forcing him to squint against its glare. He sighed deeply, steeling himself. He pushed himself to his feet and took one final glance across the city he loved, and the garden that had always brought him solace. Then he turned, walked back towards the palace. Many years ago he had made a promise. Now he intended to keep it. Right, okay, that's the first part. So, lifeless and hollow, Xin Zhao felt a wraith haunting the location of its demise. Death would be preferable. Falling while protecting his lord would at least have been honourable. He drifted along corridors of the palace that seemed suddenly cold and lifeless. The servants he saw did not speak, shuffling along in shocked silence, their eyes wide. The guards had passed, the guards he passed wore mournful expressions. They saluted, but he looked down. He did not deserve their acknowledgement. Finally, he stood before a closed door. He reached out to knock, but paused. Did his hand tremble? Causing his weakness, he rapped sharply on the solid oak, then stood to attention, planting his butt of his spear sharply to the floor. The sound echoed across the corridor. For a long, drawn-out moment, he remained motionless, staring at the door, waiting for it to open. So I presume this might be maybe Javin IV. A pair of patrolling palace guards turned a corner and marched past him, armour clanking. Shane kept him from looking at them. Still, the door remained shut. I believe High Marshal Crown Guard is in the North Ward, my Lord Xin Zhao, said one of the guards, overseeing increased security. Xin Zhao sighed inwardly, but gritted his teeth and nodded his thanks to the guard. My lord, said another guard, no one blames you for... Thank you, soldier, Xin Zhao said, cutting him off. He did not want their pity. The pair saluted and moved on their way. Xin Zhao turned and marched down the corridor in the direction the guards had come, towards the northern wing of the palace. It was no reprieve that the High Marshal Tiele Crown Guard was not in her office. It merely drew out this matter. He walked through a hall hung with pendants and banners, pausing briefly beneath one of them, standard depicting the white-winged sword of Demacia on a field of blue. It had been woven by the king's late mother and her handmaidens, and even though almost a third of it had been destroyed by fire, it was a work of astounding beauty and artistry. It had fallen at the Battle of Salt Spike Hill, but King Jarvan himself had led the charge to reclaim it, Xin Zhao at its side. They cut their way through hundreds of fur-clad Ferodian berserkers to reach it, and Xin Zhao had been the one to lift it high, even as flames lit at its embroidery. The sight of the reclaimed standard had turned the tide that day, rallying the Demacians and securing an unlikely victory. Jarvan had refused to allow it to be repaired on its safe return to the palace. He wanted all who looked upon it to remember its history, kind of like Sylas does with his shackles. Okay. Xin Zhao passed a small room, a remote library in a little used corner of the palace that was one of the king's favourite places to spend his evenings. It was his place of escape, where he could get away from the fussing of servants and nobles. Xin Zhao had spent many long nights here with the king, sipping fortified honey wine and discussing the finer points of strategy, politics, and now distant memories of their youth. Jarvan was ever the stoic, stern leader in public, yet here, in the inner sanctum, particularly in the early hours, when they were deep in their cups, he would laugh until tears ran down his face and speak with passion about his hopes and dreams for his son. Fresh pain racked Xin Zhao as he realised he'd never hear his friend laugh again. Without having noticed it, Xin Zhao found himself passing by the halls of training. He'd probably spent more hours there over the last 20 years than anywhere else, right? So he's been in Demacia for over 20 years. That was his real home, where he felt most himself. There he'd spent untold hours training and sparring with the king. That was where, to the king's amusement and delight, his son had adopted Xin Zhao into the family, where Xin Zhao had taught the young prince to fight with sword, spear and lance, where he consoled him, wiping away his tears and helping him back to his feet when he fell, where he'd laughed with him and cheered his success. Thought of the prince struck him like a blade in the gut. Xin Zhao might have lost his dearest friend the previous day, but young Jarvan had lost his father. He'd already lost his mother in childbirth. Now he was alone. With a heavy heart, Xin Zhao made his walk on, but a familiar sound gave him pause. A blunted blade slamming down against wood. Someone was training. Xin Zhao's brow furrowed. A sickening feeling grew in the pit of his stomach as he slipped through the heavy doors leading within. At first he couldn't see who was there. The arches and pillars around the edges of the vaulted room conspired to keep them obscured. The sound of sword strikes echoed loudly around him. Rounding a cluster of pillars, he at last saw the prince hacking at a wooden practice dummy with a heavy iron training sword. He was covered in a sheen of sweat and his chest was heavy with exertion. His expression was one of anguish and he attacked wildly. Xin Zhao paused in the shadows, heart aching to see the young prince so raw and hurt. He desperately wanted to go to him, to console him, to help him through this awful time. For the prince and his father were the closest Xin Zhao had ever had to family. But why would the prince want him here? He was the king's bodyguard, and yet he lived while the king lay dead. True. Hesitancy was not familiar to Xin Zhao, nor a feeling he was comfortable with, not even in the fleshing pits of Noxus had he ever second-guessed himself. Shaking his head, he turned to leave. Uncle? Xin Zhao cursed himself for a fool for not having left immediately. They were not blood relatives, of course, but the prince had started calling him uncle soon after Xin Zhao had come into the king's service 20 years earlier. Jarvan had just been a boy and no one had corrected him. The king had been amused by it at first, but over the years, Xin Zhao had become as close as blood kin to the royal family, and he had watched over the king's son as if he had his own. He turned slowly. Jarvan was a boy no longer, standing taller than Xin Zhao. His eyes were red-rimmed and surrounded by dark rings. Xin Zhao guessed he was not the only one who had no sleep. My prince, he said, dropping to one knee and bowing his head low. Jarvan didn't say anything. He stood there, looking down at Xin Zhao, breathing hard. My apologies, said Xin Zhao, his head still lowered, for interrupting or not being there to protect my father when he was murdered. My apologies, said Xin Zhao, his head lowered, for interrupting or for not being there to protect my father when he was still murdered. So Jarvan asked. Xin Zhao glanced up. Jarvan glowered down at him, a heavy training sword still in hand. He had no good way to answer, to say all that he felt. I failed him, he said at last, and I failed you. Jarvan stood for a moment longer before turning and striding to one of the many weapon racks arranged around the room. Rise, Jarvan ordered. As Xin Zhao did, the prince threw him a sword. He caught it reflectively in his offhand, still holding his spear in his right. It was another training blade, heavy and blunted. Then Jarvan was coming at him, swinging hard. Xin Zhao jumped backward, avoiding the blow. My lord, I don't think this is, he began, but his words were cut off as Jarvan lunged at him again, thrusting his sword at his chest. Xin Zhao batted it aside with the haft of his spear and stepped back. My prince, he said, but again Jarvan attacked more furiously than before. 2 strikes came at him this time, one high, one low. Jarvan may have been using a training blade, but if those blows struck, it would break bone. Xin Zhao was forced to defend himself, deflecting the first with a sidestep and an angle spear, the second with the blade of his own sword. The impact rang up his arm. "Where were you?" snarled Jarvan, pacing around him. Xin Zhao lowered his weapons. "Is this how you want to do this?" he said, in a quiet voice. "Yes," said Jarvan, his anger simmering, his sword held in a death grip. Xin Zhao sighed. "A moment," he said, and moved to put his spear on a rack. Jarvan waited for him, hands clenching and unclenching on the hilt of his sword. As soon as Xin Zhao returned to the centre of the room, Jarvan attacked. He came in a rush, grunting with effort. There was little finesse to his strikes, but fury lent him strength. Xin Zhao turned those blows aside, using Jarvan's power against him, not wishing to meet the heavy blows directly. At any other time, he would have berated the prince for his poor form. He was thinking only of attack and leaving himself open for ripostes and counter-strikes, but Xin Zhao would not interrupt the prince's justified anger, nor would he take advantage of the gaps in his defence. If the prince needed to beat him bloody, then so be it. "Where were you?" Jarvan said between strikes. So you can see why he's obviously annoyed, because like it said there, he was the king's bodyguard, and the king is dead, and he is not. So I'm interested to find out what happened. So, part 3. "I should have done this long ago," the king said, not looking up from his desk where he sat penning a letter. Every dip of the quill was an irate stab, and he wrote it fast in furious bursts. It was rare to see the king's emotions so close to the surface. "My lord," Xin Zhao said, "you have been so fixated on that which you fear," the king said, still not looking up, though he did pause from his angry scratching for a moment. "We've been fools. I've been a fool. In trying to protect ourselves, we've created the very enemy we sought to protect ourselves from." So this is obviously a memory of the past. Xin Zhao blocked a heavy blow aimed at his neck. The force of the strike drove him back a step. "You have nothing to say?" demanded Jarvan. "I should have been with your father," he answered. "There is no answer," snarled Jarvan. He turned away abruptly, tossing his sword aside with a snap. A sharp, echoing clang. For a moment, Xin Zhao hoped the prince was done, but then he retrieved a different weapon from its place upon one of the racks. Drakebane. Now the prince levelled the lance towards him, his expression hard and unflinching. "Get your spear," he said. "You are not armoured," protested Xin Zhao. Trading weapons could easily break limbs, but the slightest missed in mind parry, with a combat blade would be lethal. "I don't care," Jarvan said. Xin Zhao bowed his head. He bent to retrieve Jarvan's discarded trading sword and placed it carefully upon a rack, along with his own. Reluctantly, his heart heavy, he retrieved his spear and moved back out into the open area of the centre of the hall. Without a word, Jarvan attacked. So this is just releasing his pent-up frustration, which kind of makes sense. So, next part. "I'm not sure I follow you, my lord," says Xin Zhao. The king paused, looking up for the first time since Xin Zhao's arrival. In that moment, he looked suddenly old. His forehead was deeply lined and his hair and beard had long since gone to grey. Neither of them were young men anymore. "I blame myself," said King Jarvan. His eyes were unfocused, staring off into empty space. "I let them have too much power. It never sat right with me, but their arguments were convincing, and they had the backing of the council. I see now I was wrong to have ignored my own judgment. With this letter, I am commanding the Mage Seekers to halt their arrests." Right. I wonder if he knows about Lux and how that may play a part as well. So he was in the midst of doing that while Sylas was attacking. So if he did it a little bit earlier, maybe the result might be different. Sylas would have been released, he wouldn't have been attempted to be killed, he would have come back and tried to kill everyone. Okay. With a deft flick, Jarvan extended Drakebane towards Xin Zhao. The legendary weapon's haft almost doubled in length, its lethal blades slicing blindly fast towards Xin Zhao's neck. Okay. The Xin Zhao swayed aside, deflecting the deadly strike with a circular motion of his spear, careful the blades did not hook his own weapon. Even in the brutal contest of the fleshing, Xin Zhao had never seen a weapon like Drakebane. In truth, the secret of how to fight with it had been lost to the region of the first kings of Demacia, and in unskilled hands it was as deadly to its wielder as it was to the enemy. As such, for centuries it had been little more than a ceremonial, an icon of the ruling family. However, when the prince was still just a boy, he had dreamed of fighting with him, like the heroes of old he idolised, so Xin Zhao had promised to teach him when he was ready. Jarvan had leapt forward, bringing the lance down in a scything blow. Xin Zhao turned it aside, but the prince followed up instantly with a spinning strike that missed him by scant inches. The blade tip sliced him by his throat. Jarvan was not holding back. Before Xin Zhao could reach the young prince how to teach how to wield the weapon, however, he had to master it himself. With the king's approval, he began training to learn its secrets. Surprisingly light in the hand and perfectly balanced, it was a sublime weapon created by a master at the peak of his abilities. Forged in Demacia's infancy by the renowned weaponsmith Orlon, the lance was a revered icon of Demacia, as much a symbol of its greatness as its towering white walls of the crown of the king. Wrought to defeat the great Frostrake Maelstrom and her progeny who had plagued the early settlers of Demacia in the ages past. It had long been a symbol of the royal line. Let me find out what this is called. Hold on. Drakebane. Right, okay. Let me zoom in a little bit. Here, in fact. Whoa. Right, it looks like Drakebane is the weapon that Jarvan uses, his big, basically spear that he uses. Right, okay. So, where were we now? For years, Xin Zhao had practiced with the lance every day before dawn. Only when he felt he understood it well enough, he had begun to teach the teenage prince how to wield it. Jarvan grew to with effort, lunging at Xin Zhao. The seneschal, though only of defence, stepping neatly away and always aware of his surroundings. His spear was a blur before him, knocking the lance from its intended course each time it came at him. Young Jarvan had already been learning the uses of sword and spear and fist, as well as the more cerebral arts of military history and rhetoric. It was on his 16th birthday that he was finally presented with Drakebane by his father. He trained hard, sustaining countless self-inflicted injuries along the way to master it, but he eventually fought with the weapon as if it was an extension of himself. Jarvan pressed Xin Zhao hard, striking furiously. He gave the seneschal no respite, each attack blending seamlessly into the next. A forward lunge became an upward sweeping slash, which in turn came round in a pair of scything arcs, first in a low disemboweling cut, then back across the throat. All were avoided by Xin Zhao, his body swaying from side to side and his spear flashing to turn each strike aside. Nevertheless, while Jarvan had long been Xin Zhao's student, the prince was younger and stronger, and his tall frame gave him greater reach. No longer was he an awkward aspirant. He'd been hardened by battle and training, and Jarvan's skill with Drakebane now easily outstripped his own. Jarvan harried him mercilessly, forcing him to retreat with every step. It took all of Xin Zhao's considerable skill to remain unscathed, but it could not last. Right. The king looked down, reading over his letter. He let out an audible sigh. Had I had the courage to do this earlier, perhaps this day's disaster could have been averted, he said. He signed the letter before dripping heated royal blue wax next to his name and stamping his personal seal to it. He blew on it, then held the letter up, shaking it lightly in the air to aid its cooling. Satisfied with what the wax was dry, the king rolled the letter before sliding it into a cylindrical case of cured white leather and sealing the lid. He held it out to his seneschal, so he sent him away. Okay. Xin Zhao barely avoided a vicious slash, turning his face at the last moment. The jagged blades of Drakebane sliced across his cheek, drawing blood. For the first time since they began, Xin Zhao wondered if the prince was actually trying to kill him. There was a certain balance in dying to the son of the man who he had failed to protect. Jarvan slapped Xin Zhao's spear aside with the butt of Drakebane and turned swiftly, bringing the weapon around in a tight arc, the blade sinking his neck. It was a perfectly executed move, one that Xin Zhao had taught the prince himself. Jarvan's footwork was set up to strike was sublime, and the initial hit to his weapon was weighted just enough to knock it aside, but not so hard that it slowed the final strike. Even so, the seneschal could have blocked it. It would have been a close thing, but he trusted his speed. Even tried as he was to have ensured the strike did not land, and yet he made no move to do so. His will to fight was gone. He lifted his chin ever so slightly, so that the strike would be true. The blades of Drakebane hissed him. The blow was delivered with speed, skill, and power. It would slash deep, killing him almost instantly. The killing blow had stopped just as it touched Xin Zhao's throat, drawing a series of blood beads, but nothing more. Okay. Why will you not say where you were, said Jarvan. Xin Zhao swallowed. A warm trickle of blood ran down his neck. Because I am at fault, he said. I should have been there. Jarvan held the blade at Xin Zhao's throat for a moment longer, then stepped back. He seemed to wilt suddenly, all the fire and fury draining out of him, leaving just a grieving, lost son. My father ordered you away then, he said, and you did not wish to blame him for your absence? Xin Zhao said nothing. I'm right, am I not? Said Jarvan. Xin Zhao sighed and looked down, so he knows kind of what maybe happened. We're going to find out now. Xin Zhao remained silent and unmoving. He eyed the sealed letter the king held out to him, but did not reach out to take it. The king raised his eyebrows, and Xin Zhao finally accepted it. You wish me to give this to a runner, my lord? He said. No, said Jarvan. I will trust its delivery only to you, my friend. Xin Zhao nodded gravely and attached it to his belt. Who is it for? The head of the Maid-Seeker Order, said the king. He held up a finger, and not to one of his lackeys either, to him directly. The head of the Maid-Seeker Order. Sylas then. Xin Zhao bowed his head. It will be done, as soon as the streets are clear and the whereabouts of the escapee have been determined. No, said the king. I want you to go now. He could be so stubborn, said Jarvan, shaking his head. Once his mind was set, there was no changing it. I should have been there, said Xin Zhao weakly. Jarvan rubbed his eyes. And defy your king's order? No, that's not you, uncle, said Jarvan. What was it he had you doing? Xin Zhao frowned. My place is by your side, my lord, he said. I would not wish to leave the palace, not today. I want you to deliver that message before events worsen, said the king. It is imperative that the Maid-Seekers are reined in before this escalates. This has gone far enough. My lord, I do not think it wise for me to, Xin Zhao said, but the king cut him off sharply. This is not a request, Sanshil, he said. You will deliver this decree now. Right, so he wasn't there, but it doesn't answer the question, how did he die and who killed him? Delivering a letter, said Jarvan flatly. That's why he ordered you from his side? Xin Zhao nodded, and Jarvan let out a bitter laugh. How very like him, he said. Always thinking of state matters. You know, he missed my blade ceremony on my 14th birthday because of a meeting of the Shield Council. A meeting about taxation. I remember, said Xin Zhao. You delivered this letter, I take it? No, said Xin Zhao, shaking his head. I turned as soon as I heard the bells. I made my way back to the palace as swiftly as I was able, and ran into trouble in the streets. But by the looks of it, Jarvan said, indicating his battered appearance. Nothing that could be dealt with. Majors, said Jarvan. Xin Zhao nodded, and others who had thrown their lot in with the murderer. We should have executed them all, hissed Jarvan. Xin Zhao looked at the prince in alarm. He'd never heard him speak with such vitriol before, I think it is. Indeed, he knew the prince had always been troubled by Demacia's treatment of mages, but that was before. I do not believe your father would share that view, said Xin Zhao in a measured voice. And they killed him, snapped Jarvan. There was nothing helpful for Xin Zhao to say, so he remained silent. That moment's fire was extinguished with Jarvan almost immediately. Tears welled in his eyes, even as he tried to hold them back. I don't know what to do, he said. In that moment, he was a boy again, scared and alone. Xin Zhao stepped forward, dropping his spear, and took Jarvan in his arms, hugging him tightly. Oh, my boy, he said. Jarvan cried then, deep, breaking sobs that shook his whole body, and tears he had not yet shed now ran freely down Xin Zhao's face as well. They stood clinging to each other for a few more moments, held together by sheer loss, then stepped apart. Xin Zhao turned away to pick up his fallen spear, allowing them both a moment to gather themselves. When he turned back, Jarvan had thrown off his sweat-stained shirt and was pulling on a long white linen tunic, emblazoned with a blue-winged sword. Already he looked more composed. Now you will do what you were born to do, Xin Zhao said. You will lead. I don't think I'm ready, said Jarvan. No one ever does, at least not the good ones. But you will be with me, uncle, to help me. A coldness clawed at Xin Zhao's heart. I regret that will not be possible, he said. Ooh. Xin Zhao was conflicted. He was sworn to King Jarvan, and he had never once defied an order from him, not in 20 years of service. My place is here protecting you, my lord, he said. King Jarvan rubbed his eyes, looking suddenly tired. Your duty is to Demacia, the king said. You are the king, said King Xin Zhao. You are Demacia. Demacia is greater than any king, snapped Jarvan. This is not up for a debate, it is an order. Xin Zhao's inner sense of danger was screaming, but his devotion to duty silenced it. Then it will be done, he said. With a bow, he turned and strode from the room. I made a promise long ago, said Xin Zhao. If harm ever befell your father, my life was forfeit. And how many times did you save my father's life, said Jarvan, suddenly stern. In that moment, he seemed so much more like his father in Xin Zhao's eyes. I personally witnessed you do so at least 3 times. I know there were others. Xin Zhao frowned. My honour is my life, he said. I could not live with the shame of going back on my word. To whom did you make to pledge? High Marshal Tiana Crown Guard. Jarvan frowned. When you entered my father's service, you pledged yourself to Demacia, did you not? He said. Of course. Your pledge was to Demacia, said Jarvan. Not my father, not anyone else. Your duty to Demacia overrides all. Xin Zhao stared at the prince. He saw like his father. But what of the High Marshal? I will deal with Tiana, said Jarvan. Right now, I need you to do your duty. Xin Zhao let out a breath that he didn't realise he had been holding. Will you serve as my censor, as you serve my father? Said Jarvan. Xin Zhao blinked. Moments earlier, he'd been certain Jarvan was going to execute him, and he didn't feel that would have been unjustified. He hesitated, his emotions in turmoil, his mind reeling. Xin Zhao, uncle? Said Jarvan, our kingdom needs you. I need you. Will you do this for me? Slowly, as if expecting Jarvan to change his mind at any moment, Xin Zhao dropped to one knee. It will be my honour, my king. Good. So, Jarvan walked with Xin Zhao up through the palace towards the council room. His advisors, Xin Zhao's corrected himself, awaited. Soldiers were everywhere. Demacia's most elite battalion, the Dauntless Vanguard, had been brought in to supplement the palace guard, and they stood at every doorway, watchful and disciplined. Jarvan's expression was stern, his bearing regal. Only Xin Zhao had witnessed the outpouring of emotion down in the training room. Now in front of the palace servants, nobles, and the guard, he was in complete control. Good, thought Xin Zhao. The people of Demacia need to see him strong. Everyone they passed dropped to one knee, bowing their heads. They continued on, striding purposefully. Jarvan paused before the great council doors. One thing, uncle, he said, turning to Xin Zhao. My lord? The letter my father wanted you to deliver, he said. What happened to it? I have it here, said Xin Zhao. He loosened it from his belt and handed the leather case over. I wonder what he's going to do with it. Jarvan took it, broke the case open, and unfurled the sheet of vellum within. His eyes flicked back and forth as he read his father's words. Xin Zhao saw Jarvan's expression harden. Then he crushed the letter in both hands, twisting it as if it was wringing its neck before handing it back. Destroy it, Jarvan said. Whoa. Xin Zhao stared at him in shock, but Jarvan was already turning away. He nodded to the guards standing on either side, and the council doors were thrown open. Those seated at the long table within stood as one, bowing low. Flames crackled in an ardent fireplace set against the south wall within. There were a number of empty seats at the table. The king was not the only one who had fallen to the previous day's attack. Xin Zhao was left holding a crumpled letter, stunned. As Jarvan moved to the head of the table, he looked back at Xin Zhao standing in the door. Xin Zhao? Said Jarvan. Xin Zhao blinked. At Jarvan's right, High Marshal Tiana Crown Guard stared at him, her gaze dangerously cold. On Jarvan's other side, his gaze equally icy, was Tiana's husband, the intended recipient of the king. Med-Seekers. Okay, was Tiana's husband the intended recipient of the king's letter? The head of the Med-Seeker Order. Xin Zhao's gaze passed between them, then returned to Jarvan, who raised his eyebrows questioningly. Without further pause, Xin Zhao strode into the room and threw the letter into the flames. Then he took his place, standing behind his ruler. He hoped none of the deep concerns he suddenly felt was visible. Let us begin, said Jarvan. Let me read that last part again. Then he took his place, standing behind his ruler. He hoped none of the deep concerns he suddenly felt was visible. Let us begin, said Jarvan. Right, okay, that was really good. Okay, so it still didn't answer the questions from this and also from the comics. How did Jarvan the king die? Who killed him? But clearly you can see that there was obviously what was going on with Sylas and the mages, and he entrusted Xin Zhao to give the letter, which I didn't realise, to the head of the Mage Seekers, who happens to be Tiana Crownguard's husband, to stop persecuting the mages. But then, because Jonathan IV has obviously found out about this letter, I can kind of understand why he wants it destroyed, because he wants revenge now, basically. They killed, but then again, they apparently killed his father, so he doesn't want any peace now, he wants war, which you can kind of understand. But who's to say they killed him? Who's to say they killed him? Because I'm sure in the comics, Sylas went in to see the king or something like that. They went into the palace, didn't they? They killed a few people. He went in to see the king, but the king was already dead. So who's to say that they just killed the king? Maybe it was someone else. We shall see. Anyways, yeah, I think we'll leave it here today, guys, on this one. Hopefully you enjoyed my thoughts and reactions to the skins for Sylas. Also my favourite skins from Demacia. The story for Sylas, and also the second story for Xin Zhao as well. I think I'm going to leave it here today, guys, on this one as well, and also leave it here for Demacia. I'm going to finish off with the Legends of Runeterra gameplay. I will be doing that possibly tomorrow, and then I'm going to move on to the next region. I think I put up a poll. I put up a poll a few days ago, so the winner of that poll will be the next region I do. It's either going to be the Freyord, Noxus, Ionia, or the Shadow Isles. One of them four will be what I'll be covering next. Definitely the same theme of what I've done here as well. I will start off with the overview of the region, then I will go into each champion, and then I'll finish off something like what I've done here. Anyways, yeah, hopefully enjoyed the the review of this video, and also of Demacia in general. And I'm going to stop speaking now. So yeah, I will see you guys in the next one.